Are you curious about bodies, pleasure, and possibilities? And what about curious about what others are up to on the planet when it comes to pleasure, sex, and play? Have you considered what pleasure can do for your life, your body, and your bank account? Do you know something magical, delightful, and out of this world orgasmic is not only possible for you, but totally available to you? If you're ready to be the magical, sexual, sexy beast you know you can be, and you just need the tools to get there, you're in the right place. Now, here's the host of The Pleasure Zone, sensual movement artist, relationship and sex alchemist, Milica Jelenic.
Welcome, my sweet pleasure seekers. For those of you who saw this title and were like, woo, that's pleasurable, or you saw this title and it brought something up in you that was like almost a fear or a terror or a disgust, either way, any reaction that you had to this title is a reaction that we're going to probably look at today for the why. It's like what has you either super attracted to being tied up or really repulsed by it. And there's a lot of reasons for both of those. And there's lots of benefits to being tied up by somebody that you trust. So we're going to talk about all of that on today's show. My name is Milica Jelenic, for those of you who are brand new to this show. And I love to talk about sex and bodies and all kinds of things, from the historical to the anthropological to the biological, physiological, all the different responses that occur in the body. As well as, looking at things from those different standpoints: historical, anthropological, sociological. It's all great. In this episode, I never know what's going to show up. I don't actually write scripts for those of you who love the free form. It's kind of like going out to, the beat jazz places, the beatniks did in the 50s and 60s, and they would just riff on, and it was poetic, and there might be music in the background. And if I had like a guitar and I knew how to play it, I could riff and do some music in the background for you. Now that would be fun. Maybe I'll have somebody come on that can actually play an instrument well. I mean, I can play an instrument, but not well. And I could riff. I could just do like some beatnik riffing. So you can already see how I go off track on times, but we are going to really try and stay on track tonight, because there's a lot of important information regarding being tied up, things you should know, things that are precautions, cautionary tales, but also things that you can know that might actually give you a new perspective on being tied up. Because a lot of times, I think the first reaction, if you've never experienced it, or if you've only ever seen it in movies, or maybe you saw it in porn or heard about it or something, it can sound violent and it can sound aggressive and mean and cruel. Now, if you are in a hostage situation, you've been tied up, and this is a different scenario. That is not by consent. All the being tied up in this episode that we're talking about is 100% consensual. Consensual non-consent is what this falls under. So both parties have agreed both to tie up and be tied up. And there may be more than one party being tied up or tying up. So we're going to talk about some of the do's, some of the don'ts, some of the things that are important to know, and then some of the things to watch for, especially if you are interested in doing this in a way that can be healing for your partner, because this is actually an incredible way to invite a body to deeply release stress and trauma. As long as you're being honored, observed, your safe words are being honored and observed, this can be a dynamic way to heal. So the reason why this topic came up is I was sitting around having lunch with somebody last week who, well, they, thought they had a pretty wild sex life. They really had some points of view about all things to do with kink. They had a lot of points of view about a lot of things, but this particular one I thought was an interesting question of, why do people actually like kinky things like being tied up? And so that was a question I was asked. And there was like an air of disgust and judgment that came from them. So I already knew that they had preconceived notions about what it meant to be tied up. I already knew that what the answer was that they wanted to hear, which would be like, because they have daddy issues. And, I said that jokingly at first, and I could see the happiness in their heart that what they thought was right. And I said, I'm actually joking. It's not a daddy issues thing. It's a control thing. It doesn't have to do with daddies. It could have to do with anything control related, and trying to gain that back. And actually, as the sub who's being tied up, generally the sub is tied up, although, switcheroo, you never know. As you're being tied up, and you're actually the one in total control, because you're the one with the safe words and you're the one who is going to be giving the feedback. And if you are with a dom who's tying you up, that person should honor you, because this is not about traumatizing people or re-traumatizing them. And I've had conversations with couples who are really into kink, and they don't even understand the basics of having safe words, having conversation. They actually live in a lifestyle where it is the person's the dom and that's it. And whatever the sub in the relationship has to endure, they have to endure. And there's never a check-in. And that is a mess waiting to spill all over the place. So that is not the way to operate at all. That's not the way to operate in a non-kinky relationship. It's not the way to operate in a kinky relationship. The only way you would do that is if you already had a pre-agreed upon contract. And I'm a fan of, if you're going to live a lifestyle that's nonstop dom sub, that you should have a written contract so that everybody is aware of what's going on, so that it doesn't get misconstrued as abuse by whatever, or there's no suing, or after the relationship breaks up, because relationships always end either in death or divorce or separation, whatever, breakups or death. So the relationship will end, and it's just a matter of how do you deal with that after the fact. Now, do you turn around and get mad at the person for being your dom because they broke up with you or something? Or do you have an agreement where everybody understands and there is like a course of action that everybody knows this is, when the relationship is done, it's done, everything's finalized. It can actually be a really clear way to manage things, especially when you're in relationships that are a little bit more tricky, shall we say. Like, there's more to it when you're living a more of a kinky lifestyle than it is when you're living a vanilla lifestyle. So even vanilla lifestyles could really use some contracts, though, like like before we marry each other or move in together, let's have an agreement upon how we actually navigate these situations. How do we navigate finances? How do we navigate if we have children? How do we navigate this, that, breakups? And I have to say, my husband and I are a pair of weirdos. And before, probably by our fifth or sixth date, we didn't write it out, but we had oral agreements in so many ways. We had oral agreements. I have to laugh at myself. About certain things, so many things, and I think so many topics that a lot of people don't even address. So if you're ever wondering, like, what kind of agreements do you have, and what kind of agreements could I write, and blah, 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 and I'd like to do that, connect with me. You can connect with me through my website, milicajelenic.com, and I'm happy to work with you on creating a contract for your next relationship. Even if you're not in one, it is a really cool way to be able to get clear on what you do and don't want. And it's a really good way to get yourself, if you have been tied up in a relationship that hasn't been working for you, it will also help you get clear on some certain things that you might actually desire. So it being faced with a contract for things like breakups and discussions and how do we deal with this and how do we deal with that can really create a lot of clarity. And yes, it might sound boring, but actually it'll probably bring up stuff that you need to look at and deal with. All right, we're going to move along to being tied up, which can, again, be so fun. So I wanted to bring out, for those of you who are watching, you'll probably visually be able to see some of the things I brought out. One of them keeps slipping because it's oh so silky smooth. So I'm a fan of, if you're going to have anything wrapped around your flesh, you want it to be comfortable for you. So I've bought some like beautiful rope from the hardware store several years ago. It must be at least, must be about 7 or 8 years ago now. Holy cow, I can't believe it's had that long. So this lovely rope, it's like a silky white rope. It feels satiny on the outside. It's many, many meters long. I bought it in like a package that was pre-cut, but you can go and you can get it cut yourself. Now there's a lot of textures to ropes. There are ropes that are a lot scratchier, thicker. I like ropes that have a lot of malleability to them, like they bend really easy, and also that when you tie a knot, you can also easily slip the knot out of this. So if you have some of those ropes that are a little bit scratchier, they tend to hold a bit tighter. They're great for situations where you don't want your rope to slip, but in situations where you want to be able to untie somebody easily, having a rope that's a bit slippy is helpful. Having some surgical scissors, like the kinds with like that you would cut bandages off with, is also important, just in case there's a situation where there's constriction that you can't untie the knot. That is helpful to have on hand as well. Always have your safety things on hand. And the other one that I think is really lovely is a silky scarf. Now, this was just a scarf that came off of a dress that I had. And I didn't really like the dress, but the scarf is beautiful. It feels lovely. You can do so many things with a scarf like this. You can wrap yourself up with it. Like for experiences on just even to start to play with this to see what it feels like. You can even do things with ropes and scarves where you can just start to wrap your own self up just to see what it feels like. So, if you like that feeling, you can just start to feel what it feels like to be a little bit bound and wound up, and sort of just winding your hands around a scarf can give you a sensation of a little bit of tug. You can start to get the idea of what that feels like, but also you're in total control and there are no knots, so you can just unwind yourself. I hope that makes sense when you're listening to audio on this, but the idea is you're just kind of wrapping your hands around. So my silky scarf is about 4 inches wide, and it's about 2.5 meters long. And it has lots of place and ways to wrap it around. And what I do is I put my palms face down, and then you can put the rope between your thumbs and just kind of wrap and roll. So you can have a wrap and roll that just goes around your wrist. You can wrap and roll again if you like. You can give a little give. You can wrap and roll. You can get some neat looking strap ties happening to your hand, which can look pretty hot actually, especially on film. Actually, these are nice and shiny on film. If you want to come over to any of the video options to watch, there you can come watch, especially on YouTube. And the silky other things that you can do. So that's one, you can wrap your own hands up, but you can also do things that maybe give you a sensation of wrapping your body. So, you could start with putting it under your breasts or chest, whatever you want, whatever you've got, and you can wrap it so that it's just coming up and around. Just get a sensation. What does it feel like to have some binding feelings around your breasts that kind of lift and tug, and you're holding on to it, so you have control over that too. You want to make sure you're not choking yourself, unless you're into autoerotic asphyxiation. In that case, you do you. And you can tie your own feet, which would be hard for me to get on video. So you can see there are a lot of options, and these feel good. And I'm going to show you some more too, because binding can bring a sense of comfort. And I think if you look at it from a different perspective of this is more of a way to help the body feel comforted and snugly held, you might actually feel or notice that that might be something your body's attracted to. Instead of thinking of it as this is a way for somebody to harm me or hurt me, this might actually be a way for them that there is a power dynamic happening. And at the same time, there can be a sense of security that happens as well, and safety, that your body is snugly bound. So there's a lot of cultures actually that did binding for various reasons. I might tap into that for a minute too when we come back. So you're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Are you a subject matter expert? Are you here to share your expertise with an audience waiting to hear from you in only the way you can deliver? Are you ready to have your voice amplified across the airwaves? Inspired Choices Network has a global radio platform streaming to millions of people across the world. Professionally produced and supported by an accomplished team every step of the way, you can broadcast from anywhere in the world, knowing your voice matters, and we ensure it is delivered with ease and efficiency. Eager to hear your message, the world awaits. Contact us today to become an Inspired Choices Network radio host. Email become a host at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at inspiredchoicesnetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@milicajelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. So we're talking about today all kinds of fun things we can do with binding, bondage, tying up. This is what we're talking about. And there are historically a lot of cultures who have done binding for different reasons. And one of the first ones that comes to mind is the feet binding in China that would be done to women who were usually of like an upper class, so that their feet would be deformed to the point where they would have to be they would have to live in a way that they were being served have slaves work for them, basically. I don't know, served hand and foot. I'm trying to think if that's the right terminology. Anyhow, they would not be in a position to do any kind of physical hard labor that would involve walking or working in fields or anything like that. They might be able to do some things like reading and needlepoint and more of the feminine arts, we shall say. However, their bodies were bound in such a way that would require them to never be able to work. So ideally, if you had your feet bind, you would need to marry somebody who was wealthy, or that you were wealthy, and that you would marry to somebody who would actually look after your wealth. So culturally, that goes back for different reasons that binding would happen. And I know even in my grandmother's day and age, so my grandmother was born, I guess she was born around like 1912, I'm guessing, my one grandmother, probably. Anyway, somewhere around there. I think she was born the same year the Titanic went down. That's what I'm going with in my mind. And she was always, instead of having bras where she was where she grew up. So she was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but later that became Yugoslavia. So she was born in a part of Yugoslavia that was called Vojvodina. And back in that day, there weren't bras, and she was a really well endowed woman. And so she would bind her breasts. So I remember once when she was much older, having to help her getting into her binding. So she had like this material that was quite thick, and she also really liked it. Like she felt like it was snug and helped her feel snug in her body. It felt, and also because she didn't sexualize her body, she was very modest, always was modest her whole life. She was of a religion that was very modest. She was Nazarene. And so she bound her breasts, and as a result, her, having 10 children for one, nursing them, I suppose she would have had to nurse them all because back in the day, and then binding her breasts, her breasts were quite different looking because they got a little bit warped from the binding, just like feet get warped from binding. So people have been binding for different reasons. And for a lot of people, it was either to secure their future, right? Have your feet bound so you have your future secured. Binding your body for modesty, that's also really common. And that's common today too. There are a lot more people binding their bodies for modesty, or not wanting, or for a sense of comfort, to not want to show off their bodies so much. And so you'll find that, binders are coming back. And there are some warnings that come with binders, that you shouldn't be in them for more than 8 hours a day, and that sort of thing. And the same goes for being tied up, guys. So I am bringing this back to being tied up. So when you are tied up, there are certain positions that your body shouldn't be in for extended periods of time, because the blood loss can cause a lot of heart damage. Like having your arms raised in certain ways above your heart level for extended periods of time can actually lead to heart attacks. And it's also why those kinds of positions are used in torture, because you start to lose consciousness, and eventually you can just be killed solely from the position alone if you're stuck in that position for an extended period of time. So when you're doing this, there's certain things you need to know about human physiology that can be helpful so that you don't go around killing people. Oh, I shouldn't say that, right? That goes on social media, so nobody goes unalive. I don't know if we can edit that. It's really important to be safe, is what I want to really encourage, that it's important to be safe and to make sure you have everything set up so that you can be safe. So I would say one of the things that you, first of all, pick your material. Now, you got a lot of choices. I was showing you a silky scarf earlier, and for those of you listening, just imagine it's like about 2.5 meters long. Oh, yeah, about 2.5 meters long, 2 meters long. And it's about 4 inches wide, silky smooth, and lovely. It's a lovely, lovely piece of material that's black. I also have a white rope that's also very smooth, and it's about 10 meters long, and I've wrapped it up. Actually, I've wrapped it up into a whip, it makes a really lovely whip, but it's such a versatile thing for play. You can do so many things with rope. I encourage you to get rope and just play around with it and see what happens. You can do so much. So I'm not going to actually be doing any specific, for those of you who are watching and are hoping to see like some specific binding videos, I'm not going to be doing that. There are amazing experts out there that you can go and look for, especially there are like experts in specific kinds of knots. So for example, there's a Japanese kind of rope tying. I'm just going to try and remember what the name of that is. That is really beautiful. And it is one of these things that I love to look at the pictures of. It's called shibari. The shibari ropes themselves, there are specific shibari ropes that you can buy. I don't have a shibari rope, but you can buy them. If you look up the pictures on, like if you Google images of shibari, you'll probably see what I mean by the beauty of it. It's such a lovely art to see. And when people do it for the sake of the art. You can see why there are photographs out there that some of them are going to be oh, interesting. These used to be all available, really easy to see, but now they are censored. So I guess you have to go through some qualifying that you're over 18 to see the pictures. But there are all kinds of books that have images of shibari in it, and it's just really lovely. And I think people are not necessarily understanding the beauty and the art of it and the kink behind it, and that it is consensual. So it's now considered naughty, and it's got censors all over it. Anyhow, get yourself a lovely rope. You can watch, absolutely, there are videos on YouTube on how to specifically tie. What I really want to talk about in this episode is the importance of understanding why somebody would be asking for this. So if you have a lover who's asked for this from you and you're like debating it and you're kind of got qualms about it, and if you really have super qualms about it, absolutely get a contract written, even if you're married to the person, because you never know, they could come back years later and say something, because again, relationships always end. So you want to have something in place to make sure that you are protecting yourself and protecting them. And so what the main thing to do is to understand what is it that they would actually like to gain from this. And I think for some people, they might not even fully know. They just have an attraction to it. So the attraction is kind of pulling their curiosity in, and they're kind of like, ooh, I think my body would like this. Bodies are amazing, and they'll ask for things, and you might not have the logic behind it yet. And then you might feel trepidatious because you might feel like you're asking for something strange. So one of the ways to bring it up with your lover is doing a do's, don'ts, maybes list, which you can get on my website. You can also go over to Inspired Choices Network and look at my host page, and on my leaderboards you can find my do's, don'ts, maybes list. You can click on that and you can get that for free. So on that list I have fairly vanilla things, but you can also add to your list whatever I've written there. You can add things like shibari or rope tying of any kind. You can just add to your list. So that is one way to bring up a conversation, and then switch lists, because a lot of times there's like the question of, how do I even bring this conversation up? And one of the ways to bring the conversation up is to say, what we haven't done in a long time is we haven't looked at anything new or interesting to do in our love life. And I thought it'd be fun to go try out this do's, don'ts, maybes list from this crazy woman that I listened to on this podcast called The Pleasure Zone. And so I went and I got this list. What do you feel about that? Let's take a few minutes and look at the list and fill it out. And then you each fill out your list and you trade. And then you can see each other's list. Please be grown-ups and don't laugh at the other person's list, because that happens and that is unkind. And sometimes people are asking for things that are genuinely their big ask, and they have never maybe asked it of anybody ever. And having them be vulnerable and put that on their list and show you whatever that happens to be is a really vulnerable moment. So just honor that as an ask. And if it's something that you feel uncomfortable with, just say, that I hadn't considered that, because it might not even be something that's on my list. They might have added it. You can always just say, it's something I haven't considered. So I'll have to think about that and see if it's my do's, don'ts, or maybes, and I'll let you know. And then, you can always revisit the list in a few months. And then if your partner is ignoring that completely and it's really, really important to you, let them know, what, that last time we did the list, the thing that you mentioned that you were going to think about is really important to me. And it's part of my love languages of touch. And it would be really important to me to have that done. Whatever it happens to be, it could be touch related. It could be quality time related. When you have somebody tied up, that's a lot of quality time you can have. When you have, we were talking about the 5 kinks of the 5 kink languages a few episodes ago, and being tied up is definitely one that can get you a lot of quality time. If you both agree to be, if the dom has the sub tied up for an extended period of time, not like multiple days on end, but it could be a few hours if it's in a position where their body can be relaxed enough to relax into the bondage and the bonding. So there can be a lot of bonding that happens when you're tied up, for sure. It's kind of like a baby being, I know this is going to be a weird comparison for people, but when you swaddle a baby and they're all wrapped up in a blankie, it's very hard for them to move or squirm. And so you kind of got them held there. You can also bind people in blankets the same kind of way, wrap them tight, and that can also be really comforting. So we're going to talk more about this when we come back. So we're going to head off to our next commercial break. You're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for the Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com.
Interested in masturbating for money, copulating for consciousness, and pleasuring on purpose? 21 Days of Sexual Magicism with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic is an exploration of tools, processes, and actions that you can use to create more for your life, your body, your money inflows, and so much more. Graduated learning for all levels of interest. Learn at your own pace via video classes or join the yearly live class. Take a peek at www.milicajelenic.com.
How wonderful would it be to carry your favorite Inspired Choices Network host with you throughout your day? Well, now you can. Inspired Choices Network now has its very own mobile app. Our free app offers live streaming shows, along with thousands of podcasts and TV episodes. Our shows cover a wide variety of topics. Whether you're waking up with us, carrying us through the day, and taking us to bed with you, we're always here for you to enjoy. We're easy to find. Just search for Inspired Choices Network in the Apple App Store or Google Play Store.
This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email, info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. Tonight we are talking all about the pleasure of bondage. And in this case, I've been pretty mild with the bondage, and I haven't gone on to tie myself up and get naked and put on anything like that. I think because this is really about looking at bondage from perspective of what can bondage do to bring joy to your body in ways that even vanilla people will enjoy it. So yay, we're welcoming the vanilla crew in. And I'm a fan of anybody who's vanilla or kink or anything, as long as you are operating through consent, which means age of consent. The person must be of age of consent. That there's consent involved is so key, that there's communication, and that you're both willing to have curiosity. Those are very important. And consent is number one, which needs to be communicated. And usually what you're consenting to is from a place of curiosity. So be willing to explore too with your partner and find new solutions. Sometimes the things you might have thought were a solution didn't work. So try something else. Try and try again. There's always more things to play with. Bodies are a curious thing, and bodies receive pleasure in so many different ways. I'd kind of briefly mentioned that, there are many cultures that do bindings and for different purposes. And thinking about also binding that has happened for other reasons that were not just cultural, but straitjackets are also a form of binding that have been done for a very long time. Where it's, if you've been in any institution for any mental health issues, I don't know if they use those so much anymore, if that's like against the law to use straitjackets anymore. It probably is against the law. However, I do know that they do still restrict people's movement, because I have a friend who probably about 10 or so years ago ended up being in a mental health ward, and it's where she discovered she had a kink for being tied down. So I can't remember the full situation, but I do remember her calling me after and going, having this like wild revelation that being tied to the bed in the ward really had her going, and she was practically orgasming from it, which was confusing everybody, including herself at first. God bless her. I'm not going to name her on here. But, I don't even know if she listens to the show, actually. But if she does, this is a shout out to you. You know exactly who you are, because you're the only person I know that has ever reported that to me. So I think it's interesting and fun that you could be in what they think that they think that they're punishing you or trying to restrain you or something, and you're getting off on it. There you go. So we kind of joked about that for a while. Anytime she might end up going back in there, it was like, hey, you just going back in for the fun or what? So yeah, you can have some fun with that. So other forms of bondage, like straitjackets, can totally work. Other clothes that are binding clothes can work as well. I have a few things, like when you look at corsets, they're a great way to bind as well. So it's not always that you're being tied up with a rope. It's that there's constriction going on and there's like a tightness that happens. So corsets are a fabulous way of having your body feel tightly bound and wound and supported. Stays as well. So stays are maybe a language that is more geared towards people who do historical fashion. And I'm a big fan of fashion historians and watch them on YouTube. So they talk a bit about the difference between stays and corsets, and they are different, but they're all basically for the same purpose of supporting the body, and they're meant to be comfortable and comforting. So as much as there were reports that they were absolutely the worst thing that ever happened, they were probably quite comforting. As in, my grandmother, to the day she died, not just out of modesty, but out of comfort, she loved to have binding. And so it was probably something quite comforting for her body and her back to give her support, because she didn't have any support for her big kajangas. So she needs something to support those babies. So different ways of binding is what I'm getting at. And for some people, it could be, the binding of having one limb bound with like, having a cast on it. That can also create the same feeling of binding, and some people really enjoy that, right? So there's, again, so many different ways you can have, your limbs bound, your body just generally bound up. Like you can have your torso bound, like I was saying, with binders, with corsets, with stays, any of those things that kind of create a kind of a comforting tightness. Not necessarily tight, but there's a comforting, secure snuggle that happens in the body. And when you look at animals in general, there are things like thunder jackets for dogs that actually will hold their bodies so that they don't get afraid of thunder or firecrackers or anything like that, the same kind of noises. So thunder jackets, which are a little bit weighted, and they're kind of like a corset for dogs. are very comforting for dogs and help their nervous system calm down. I bet the people who created those were, I'm just guessing, but I could be wrong, were maybe into bondage themselves and realized the benefits for humans. So let's try this for animals who are stressed. And even things like horses having weighted blankets on them. There are ways that animals have had bindings as well so that they can feel calmer. So if you just take that concept and you bring it over to humans where we get kinky with it, as well as just doing it for sheer enjoyment and body comfort, there is so much room for play on that. So one of the things that might be also an interesting thing to play with is, I was mentioning shibari, so definitely go check out videos on that. Get yourself some rope. Do some easy ties on yourself. Like practice on you first. You can have your scissors ready too in case you mess up, so you can cut yourself out of that. And watch the videos, follow the prompts, everything that is shown. And if you're really curious about how to do this more on a professional level, I have a friend, Gaia Morissette, who's been on this show several times, and she was on last year where we were talking about her course on using BDSM for trauma recovery. And I think you need to be a practitioner to be in that course. I am in that course as I'm a practitioner, but she does have other courses for beginners on all kinds of things that are kink related. So you can always check her stuff out. Empress Gaia, I think, is her website. But there are lots of sites out there as well, and you can always check out other YouTube videos on how to do shibari, which is, I would say, probably your best route on learning how to tie somebody up. So we talked about ropes. We talked about what else could we tie people up with, right? So, we can get really hardcore. You could start to use things like chain if you wanted. And when you're doing chain, you'd really need to have some wire cutters around, like chain cutters. That is going extreme, guys. So unless you're experienced, there might be like a level. Like if we were going to do like a graduating level, you might want to go ribbons, nice and silky smooth, rope of any texture. I prefer silky smooth rope, but some people like the rough rope. They like that kind of biting feeling into their skin, like they like it rough, and they might prefer that, and they maybe want to leave marks. Which is another reason why, if you're doing this with somebody, you want to have consent, because if you're leaving marks and they go to the police, they have evidence and you could get charged for holding them captive, right? So make it legal, make it consensual, be kind with it, have your safe words in place so that if there is a time when they're just done with it, you can get them out. And if you can't get them out fast enough, you've got the scissors to cut them out. So ribbons, rope, and then the next one would be, we could do bindings with all kinds of clothes even before that if you wanted. And then coming into that further would be chains. So chains, you might want to do that in layers because sometimes the chains can be really rough on the body. So you might want to actually put something underneath, like putting ribbons on first, binding in a ribbon, then binding with metal chain after. And you can either tie the chain around or you can use locks. But if you're using locks, you're going to want to have metal snippers that you can cut locks with. I think there's a special name for those. You definitely want to make sure that you are doing this in a safe way. And again, try it on yourself first, like your legs, and then be able to get yourself out. You can also use things like handcuffs. So you can go from really soft handcuffs that you can get at the sex store, online, that are fluffy. There are more silicone ones, which I have, that are washable and they're lovely. And you can do multiple things with those and connect several pairs, and you could have your hands tied to your ankles because they're quite wide. And then you can tie in the middle with something if you wanted. So you've got all of those going on. And if you wanted to even take that a little further, you could do a whole combination of things. You could have ropes and ribbons and metal, especially if you like the texture of a lot of different things and you want to experiment with everything all at once. I would not encourage you in any way to put rope around the neck, even if the person's asking for that. If you have zero experience in this and you have zero tying and untying experience, that would be your last resort. Even if they're into asphyxiation or autoerotic asphyxiation, even if you're into that, you got better choices than to do ropes or chains first. You want to do something that you can easily undo yourself. Maybe tie in a bow where you can easily get it out if you're practicing that. So it's important to be safe. I can't stress that enough. Safe, and also be very much in consent. Whether even when you're doing it to yourself, check in with your body. Is this something that is going to relieve stress, or is this something that's going to increase stress? So how and why does this actually relieve stress? We're going to talk about that in the next segment. So you're listening to The Pleasure Zone here on Inspired Choices Network, and we'll be right back after this commercial.
Are you secretly a voyeur, wondering what's going on in other people's sex lives? What if now is the time for a totally different sexual evolution? Are you interested in people who are pioneers of different sexual and pleasurable practices? Lean in now with Milica Jelenic, where she will entice you and your body to know your own pleasure zone. On the Pleasure Zone radio show with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic, you'll receive tools, inspiration, and a foundation to allow yourself to receive more in your sex life, and quite possibly other areas of your life as well. Listen for The Pleasure Zone with Milica every Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, 7 p.m. Central Time, 6 p.m. Mountain Time, and 5 p.m. Pacific Time on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. This is The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. To participate in the program today, join our live studio audience in our chat room at InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. You can also make the choice to ask or comment by email. info@MilicaJelenic.com. Now, back to the program.
Welcome back, my sweet pleasure seekers. So one of the questions I wanted to address is like, what are the benefits of being tied up, and why do people actually choose this? And it came up solely because I had a conversation with somebody who was completely in judgment of it, thinking that everybody who does this must have issues. No, but everybody does tend to have stress, and some people have anxiety, and this is a great way to relieve stress and anxiety. And why is that? Why would this actually relieve anxiety? So again, under the conditions of consent, age of consent, must be age of consent, which is different everywhere in the world. But I would say age of consent is 18 or older. So if you're in a country where it's 12 or 14, 18 or older. Age of consent. So that is pretty key, that you're in the space of consent, you have a safe word, so you have your communication down, and you are with somebody that you feel safe with, that you trust. So being tied up, you can let in that moment of being tied up, your body has nowhere to go and nothing to do. If you have your hands bound and your feet bound, or if you're hog-tied, or any kind of position where you aren't really able to move much, you are gonna have your body automatically surrender. And it'll be like probably the one time in a long time where you don't have to do and you cannot do anything. So it can be an amazing way to relieve anxiety. It can actually take your body from being in parasympathetic dominance or in sympathetic dominance all the way down to calm, where you can actually feel deep connection with yourself. You absolutely get present with yourself. And in getting present with yourself, you can also be present with the person that's with you. And the person that's with you, that's tied you up, needs to be present with you. They need to be there observing you, making sure you're okay, checking on your breathing, checking on your stress levels, checking on if you've given the safe word or not. You know, they need to be present because you could change your mood or your mind in any moment. So it can be one of the singular strangest moments in your life, in that it's probably the one time where you don't have stress. Now, if you were tied up in these conditions where you didn't trust the person, you didn't have a safe word, and it wasn't consensual, all of your anxieties would skyrocket. But because of the trust, the consent, and the communication with safe words, you know that you trust that person, and that person has proven it to you. So if you're going to ever go for like your full body being tied up, like full shibari from like shoulders down, or being just tied up in different ways with different techniques, or being tied and hung, that's other options. There are like lots of different ways that you can be tied up or hog-tied or tied to things. You will need to start small. So start with a person. If you've never tried it before, start with just your hands or your feet being bound. And you can start with your hands being bound either with ropes or ribbons or using handcuffs. And once you know and trust that your partner, hopefully it's somebody that you know and trust for a long time, or is a professional dom, will honor your safe words, then your body will just start to automatically relax. So you can actually time it too. You can start with being bound for like 1 to 5 minutes, and then ask them to untie you, so that you know that they hear you and they've responded, and then you can build the trust. It's actually a really cool way to build trust as well. Build trust and intimacy is that you know that your partner is hearing you, you're communicating, they're hearing you, they're giving you feedback, and they're responding. And then you're like, oh, they hear me. Whew, I can relax. And I know it sounds wacky, guys, but it can be incredibly healing. Then move on to like the 5 to 10 minutes. And the more you can build up the trust and knowing that your partner is going to be there and respond, you can add other things to it, right? You could be tied up and you might want other things done to you too. But I think at first, just experience the binding and see how your body responds to that. Now, if after a minute you go into absolute panic, try take a break from it for a bit, try 15 seconds and just see how you feel. And you can even try it with yourself for 1 minute and just unbind yourself, see how you feel. And then what's really important is the aftercare. So after doing all the binding and all the bondage, it's really important to do aftercare, because it can bring stuff up. It can bring up things that maybe there are memories that arise from the deep that you don't remember. Like maybe you've been tied up in a past life or this life, and maybe it was really traumatizing. So you need to let your body process that. And sometimes it's through conversation, or it's like, you know what, I need to go for a walk and move this out of my system, or I need to have body work done to move this out of my system, or I need something, maybe some juice and some tea and some comfort to move this out of my system. So aftercare with this sort of work, especially with kink, is really, really integral, guys. Like, don't just walk away after you've tied somebody up. Don't just walk away from them. Or if you've just been tied up, make sure that you request that they spend time with you, because this is really about this. In my opinion, it can be an incredibly healing experience, or it can be incredibly traumatizing. So if you're looking to traumatize and harm people, then you won't care about aftercare or about consent. But if you're looking to be kind and looking to heal, then you will care about aftercare, which includes asking some questions like, how are you feeling? What's going on? And, what would you like to, would you like some tea? Would you like something to eat? Is your body okay? Do you have any sore spots? Do you need a rub down? All of that. Take some aftercare. Care about the person that you're with, because they're actually processing a lot with you, and their body is willing to let go deeply. Like, what a great way to surrender. And it can take a lot of courage to be with somebody for the first time and be tied up and let them do that to you. And for you, really, it's for you. So take it one step at a time, add some time to it every session, and have fun with it, and connect with me if you need more advice. So
thank you for listening to The Pleasure Zone with sensual movement artist Milica Jelenic. The Pleasure Zone returns next Monday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Central, 6 p.m. Mountain, and 5 p.m. Pacific on InspiredChoicesNetwork.com. We hope you'll join us. Until then, have the best week of your life by choosing to be turned on and tuned in to your body.